de nouveau, merci d'être de retour. Alors, vous voyez, on va garder un petit peu le retard qu'on a depuis ce matin, mais c'est pas bien grave. On a des présentations d'une très grande qualité, alors ça vaut certainement la peine. J'espère que vous avez bien mangé, que vous avez eu le temps de visiter aussi l'exposition commerciale. Alors, je vous rappelle que Géocongrès2014 a aussi organisé des activités grand public. Il y avait ce matin un rallye des jeunes dans l'espace commercial. Vous les avez peut-être vus, ce rallye des jeunes. Et il y a à l'extérieur de la salle depuis ce matin un kiosque monté par la Ville de Québec, la Ville de Lévis, mais également la communauté métropolitaine de Québec. Alors, c'est vraiment avec une carte et tout ça. Alors, c'est vraiment une façon d'essayer de rejoindre un plus grand public pour leur présenter le type d'application dont on parle ici. Alors, je vous invite à la pause qui aura lieu vers 15h30, 15h40, à peut-être aller faire un tour à l'extérieur, s'il fait assez beau, bien sûr, s'il n'y a pas de grêle ou de pluie, pour aller voir ce kiosque-là. Alors, voilà, c'est la session 2 donc, du Géocongrès. Le thème en est la gestion du territoire. Nous aurons cet après-midi 6 présentations en tout, suivies de la même table ronde et période d'échange à 16h45 à peu près. La pause donc au milieu de tout ça. Et tout de suite, j'aimerais vous présenter le premier conférencier. Titre de sa présentation, 200 ans de cadastre, qu'est-ce que ça représente pour la génération du nouveau millénaire? Alors, M. GalvinAdglinton est leader du programme foncier de la Banque mondiale. Il est basé aux États-Unis. Il supervise le travail d'une équipe de spécialistes qui mettent en œuvre des projets et des travaux de recherche dans 17 pays de la région Europe et Asie centrale. Au cours de sa carrière, M. Adlington a collaboré à des projets de réforme foncière, de cadastre, d'enregistrement foncier, entre autres dans 36 pays à travers le monde, dont le Malawi et les anciennes républiques soviétiques. M. Adlington, s'il vous plaît, c'est à vous.
Thank you very much. I get the post-lunch session. I'm going to be talking about cadastre, but it's not going to be difficult. It's just over 200 years since Napoleon ordered what we consider, or many people consider to be the first of the modern cadastres. And so what I'm going to be looking at is a bit of the future, a bit of the past, because people of my age do like to look at the past, and to try and think a bit about what the future means for cadastral surveyors. So it's going to be a fairly straightforward package here. I'm going to explain why I've chosen that title. Going to explain what the World Bank is doing, being involved in this. The World Bank is a development bank. That is, we usually give large sums of money to countries to build roads or build hospitals and so forth. But we have been heavily involved in cadastral work, especially in the Europe and Central Asia region. Going to give a little cadastral history and then think a little bit about what the new generation are thinking they would need from a cadastre. And I said I'd go back a little bit. In 1984 was the year I became a member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, and the first lecture I went to was by Professor Vidal Ashkenazi, who talked about the wristwatch locator. And you have to think about what it was like in those days. The EDM machines, electronic distance measurement systems, had been around for a while. Total stations were just coming into being, but cadastre people are very conservative. And in many countries around the world, you still had to measure with a tape, a steel tape, and make all the corrections, and it wasn't often that you were allowed to use more modern equipment. The GPS systems, they were still being developed by the US. You could use Doppler systems if you were trying to get control to an area, and there was no trigonometric network. But basically, it was very, very early days for making this sort of assertion. A few years later than this, the first GPS systems were coming out. You could buy one station, which you would have to set up on a trig pillar, for $250,000, and you could buy another one for the same price in order to do your differential corrections and fix your positions elsewhere. And there was this man telling us all that in the future you would be able to have a system which you could fit in your pocket, which would tell you where you were, and that one day it will even be on your wristwatch. Of course, everybody thought he was completely mad. We all know that this is now, that history came true. Another visionary, if you like, was Peter Dale, and I went to one of his talks in the early 90s. And this was a time when I just received my new computer. It had 20 megabytes on the hard drive. To me, this was more memory than I could ever use. And he was talking about the future of cadastre, how it was going to be all digital, including the digital maps, which took huge amounts of data, and how the memory restrictions that there were then, and the speed restrictions. This was also the problem, that the speed of the computers would mean that it was very difficult to transfer digital imagery across. And he was saying, no, that'll all be solved. And again, really another visionary and another one that people were thinking he hasn't got this right. But has he? I've been working a lot in Russia recently. And maybe 10 years ago, in Russia, the situation was that there were 3 agencies dealing with cadastre and property rights. Everything was on paper, and if you wanted to get a transaction done, you had to go from one office to another office, and if you followed the trail to get the paper from one office to the next office to the next office, it was virtually impossible for the first piece of paper to still be valid by the time you got to the 3rd office. And really the only way you could really get around that was to play a little bit under the table as well as over the table, and it would take about 18 months. 10 years ago. And today, in fulfillment of Professor Dale's prophecy, if you like, you'll see that they have a database, a single database for the whole of Russia, for the cadastre and their registry system. They have 253 million registered parcels. And 10 years ago, they didn't. They had registered parcels on paper in some places. If you had 17 million iPads, you could record that, and they now have it centralized. They have 72,000 staff who are all linked to this system. Daily, over 450,000 applications and 50 million registration actions every year. They've gone further. There are now apps. They have 140,000 apps that have been purchased and are in use. 40,000 on Android systems. And these are in use every day. They are operating these systems. They are going completely electronic and doing away with paper. And if a country the size of Russia can do that, that's quite something. Okay, so the World Bank. Why do we get involved in this business? As I said, we are primarily a development bank that gives money for infrastructure. Well, I'm going to give the example of the Europe and Central Asia region, which is where I've been working mostly over the last 15 years. There are 30 countries in there. It's an area which was once, as most of you would know, primarily state-owned property. There was no privately owned property in the former Soviet Union, and the whole concept of establishing a registration system to allow the real estate market to operate was something completely new. Remember, they had at that stage no laws, they had no surveyors who could do the type of cadastral survey that we do. They had no institutions teaching it, they had no valuers, no professional valuers. It was all being created from scratch. In those 30 countries of that region, a population of almost 1 billion people, or almost 900 million people, they've been registering property like mad, probably something between 300 and 400 million properties registered over the last 15 years. The progression went from assigning the property rights to individuals, giving them their rights, then protecting their property rights to encourage the real estate markets to operate, and then improving the efficiency and management of those rights. The World Bank itself has been involved in 43 projects in the country. We've lent out $1.2 billion on this, and the countries themselves and other donors have put in even much more money than that. But why? Why would the World Bank get involved in such a activity? And the reason is, this is an extract from The Economist from 2003. Land and property markets, including construction, may contribute as much as 15% to GDP in a developed country, and nearly 2/3 of a nation's wealth is derived from property assets. So if you're going to make your economy work, you've got to get your property systems working. And this was De Soto's theory from his book, In the Mystery of Capital, from 2000. He was basically saying there's a direct correlation between a nation's wealth and having an adequate property registration system. And in 2000, for that region, he said, he compared them with the developing countries and said they look astonishingly similar. Strong underground economies, inequality, mafias, political instability, and so on. And most people cannot participate in an expanded market. And so what's it like 14 years later? Well, if you look at the doing business records for registering property, for covering the whole world, you will find that 11 of the top 20 countries in that region are from that region. Those that perform this function of registration of property for the advantage of the business community. So let's go back a little bit, because I said I wanted to talk a little bit about our cadastral history before we get to look at what the millennial generation would want to look at. And if you look historically, I think you will find that, cadastre actually, or property boundaries, goes back as long as mankind itself. Just like, if you like any other animal, you stake out your own property, you protect it from others. Almost not surprising, the first real records of cadastre go back to examples where property tax needs to be collected. And that the Babylonians and Egyptians got into that in the 3rd millennial BC. The Roman Empire had their property tax systems. India around 1000 AD, and the one I'm always proud of, the first real European cadastre from England in 1086 with the Domesday Book. It's a shame they didn't keep it up, really. For ownership, the other purpose of cadastre, really, the property boundaries, it goes back a long way too. We all know the 10 Commandments of Moses, but did you know he had 613 others, of which one was, cursed is anyone who moves their neighbour's boundary stone. So they recognised the importance of these things even then. And Jeremiah the prophet, he was one of the first recorded people who actually made a transaction, bought land from his cousin Hanamel. So you've got two parties to the transaction. He paid 17 shekels for the land, so you had a consideration. They created a deed, had witnesses who signed, they sealed it, made duplicate copies, and put it in a safe storage place, a clay jar in those days that will last a long time. And all done in front of all the Jews sitting in the courtyard. So there you had your publicity. And they're the principles that we still use today for when transacting property. And when we go to the modern cadastre, it started with the French. As I said earlier, he ordered the survey of 100 million parcels for land tax purposes. You can see the type of technology used. They used triangulation. They used plane tables. They did not put monuments in. They didn't put lots of concrete monuments in. They just made a graphical cadastre as well as they could. Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire followed suit. Again, you can see the type of equipment used there: plane tables, chains, tape measures, compasses. And they produced their graphical cadastre. Now, we all know, at least those of you who are cadastral surveyors, how things have changed a bit since then. And if you look in Lithuania now, you'll see everything is electronic. They use GPS equipment for their measurements. The registers are online. The maps are online. Valuation data is all online. And it's just a modern cadastral system. Okay, so this is a modern cadastral system. But what will the younger generation look? What are the millennial generation? This people who are very young today, even younger than you people sitting here in the audience. Well, I asked someone who is in his mid-30s. I said, what do you think will be the situation? What do you think for cadastre, for property rights registration? What do you think the future holds? And his answer was there will be more 3D imagery, more online capacity, more e-services being provided and paperless systems, greater levels of accuracy, and linkages to other services provided. And I think most of us would say, yes, that's the way things are going. But then I asked someone who's in their mid-20s, and she is someone who works for us in the World Bank. She's been with us for a year. She's not a surveyor. She's not a GIS specialist. She's an economist. And I said, well, what would you expect from your cadastre, from your registry system, if you wanted to buy a property or you wanted to go into business and you wanted to find out? She said, well, first of all, I want an app. And it should show the real world in 3D. It must be intelligible immediately. It should show all the information I need. I want to know where the shops are, where the mall is, where the schools are, where the transport networks are. I want to see the recent sale prices. I want to know what the rents are and what the trends are in that area. I want to know how much property tax I might have to pay. And if there are any planning restrictions, where the parking is, where the gym is, what's the employment opportunities in the area. Those are the sort of things I want to know about if I'm thinking of having a transaction in that area. And she wants to make the transactions online. She doesn't want to have to go to some stuffy old lawyer's office or to some stuffy old cadastral office. She wants to just do it online. And it all needs to be seamless. She shouldn't have to go from one app to another app to another app to get all this done. It must be quick and intuitive. So it should be straightforward. People must understand it quickly and totally reliable. They don't ask for much, do they, the younger generation? Totally reliable. I must be able to trust this completely, guaranteed by the government. And I don't want anyone messing with me once I'm making all these inquiries. I don't want advertisers coming in and saying, oh, you need this, and I don't want other people knowing my business. So someone in their mid-20s is thinking along those lines. I'm wondering what my grandchildren, who are now 10 and 13 years old, will think in 10 years' time what they want. But what does this mean for cadastral surveyors? Well, you'll all recognise this type of diagram. To be honest, it's not this. And if this works, you'll see the drone, the image of the drone. You'll see the dog barking at the drone. And you can see the area. You can see all the boundaries. You can see all the properties surrounding it. And this is done by a real estate agent, so that's why you keep seeing the swimming pool. Oh, not that bit, sorry. Have I missed the bit? There we go. Okay, if you look at that, this is done with a drone, and if the software is correct and the camera is of good quality, which they can be, every pixel on that image has a coordinate. It has X, Y, and Z. You can derive any distance. You can derive the area. You can see the picture. You can tell in the future if there's any additions to the building or not. This is the sort of image that I think we should be expecting to see in our cadastral systems of the future. Now I have to get back to where I started. Floor plans. Again, not very intelligible to people who are not surveyors. This is intelligible. And again, you've got the same thing. You can do the floor area, you can get the height, you can annotate it, people can see exactly what is there. They can make use of this better to decide where they're going to put their piano or where they're going to put their wardrobe or their whatever piece of furniture it is. And again, it's a digital record with coordinates. There's no reason you can't have coordinates in 3 dimensions for this type of thing. So, my suggestions to you, the cadastral surveyors. You know, I started off by showing how people like Vidal Ashkenazi, Peter Dale, saw the future. They could see what was going to happen, and they could, and people, when they listened to them, said, right, this is how we need to structure the way forward in our discipline. I would suggest to you, as you go through your thinking about your future business, you need to be very customer focused. Think of what the 20-year-olds, the ones who are 20 years old now, want and expect. This is the thing, my grandson, when he gets his iPhone, he expects to find every piece of information there available straight away. And he will not understand that it is not available in 10 years' time or 15 or 20 years' time when he's looking for a property. I think you're going to need to be more broad in your discipline, covering all matters relating to land administration. You might need to create consortia with lawyers, real estate agents, planners, in order to provide this complete service. I'm not convinced that the single standalone surveyor has a long-term future unless they can link up. And I would say this other thing is that, and we've seen it with many professions, these changes will happen anyway. They will happen with you or without you. And I think they should happen with you because you're the professionals in this field. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. Thank you.